Hey everyone, my name's Dom. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to do another tag video for you, and it's just one that I randomly found online, but it suits two purposes. So I'm going to do the BookTube tag, and I'm going to include a mini tutorial on how I create my video thumbnails. So if you're interested in finding out more, stick around. So this is just a quick tag video that I found just randomly whilst browsing around online. I actually found this on the Reddit r/booktube sub and thought actually there's a couple of questions in here which are quite useful. I've seen plenty of questions asked on Discord of booktubers over what software do they use for editing, what cameras do they use for recording, how do they create their thumbnails and so forth. And I've also had specific questions directed at me asking how I create my thumbnails, because I guess a lot of my thumbnails are a little bit different to some of the other thumbnails that you see around the community. So where I've been asked to create an actual tutorial on how I create those thumbnails, I wasn't sure that it really kind of suited me and my channel because it's not really what I'm about, but because it's a question that's asked in this tag, I thought actually it's a good opportunity to kind of hit that and kill two birds with one stone without having a dedicated video just for a bit of Photoshop work. So let's just get into the questions. As usual, I'll put timestamps in the description so you can follow around the chapters and skip the parts that you're not interested in or go directly to the ones that you are interested in. So question one is, what type of camera do I use? And actually this is a really apt time to have this question because my camera has just been attacked by one of my cats, who's sitting at my feet at the moment watching me, kind of glaring up at me because I've taken away a new toy. So I just use my phone. I've got a Samsung Galaxy S9 because I really like the camera on this, and for video it's turned out to be absolutely everything that I need. There's a few issues that I've come across with it, the main one being that it will only allow me to record in kind of 4-minute segments because of the file size, and it gets a little bit fussy if I go beyond that or if I use up too much memory and have to switch between the phone's internal memory and the SD card. It just can't seem to cope with that. I then use a selfie stick as a tripod, which I then kind of strap to one of the bedposts basically to get the correct height and everything that I need for it. And then I've got a lapel mic here, which I just plug into the phone, and the cable between the phone and myself is what my cat has just attacked and brought the whole thing toppling down towards me. Question two is, how do I create my thumbnails? So this is a question that I've had quite a lot with my thumbnails. I use Photoshop, and what I'll do is I'll put a mini tutorial instead of here in the middle of the video. I'll put it right at the end so it's easier for you to skip if you're not interested in watching that part. If you are interested, just keep on watching, or you can skip using the chapters down at the bottom of the video. I use Photoshop though because it's something that I'm comfortable with. I've used it for years for different projects. I've basically taught myself how to use it using tutorials and trial and error, so I'm by no means an expert, but it's what I'm comfortable with, and for what I'm looking for, I'm quite happy with the results I get. Question three is, what software do I use to edit my videos? And for me, I use DaVinci Resolve because it's absolutely fine for what I need. It's a free bit of software. There is a paid upgrade for some of the additional things, none of which I've actually come across needing to use yet. There are things like advanced effects and so forth, which for a BookTube video, I really do not need. So DaVinci Resolve does everything that I need, loads of things that I don't need, so it's plenty powerful enough for my purposes, and I don't have to pay for it, so it's a win-win. And just for inception's sake, I'll put up a little clip here of editing this exact clip that I'm talking about, so you can see the kind of the interface and how it works and so forth. Question four is, why did I start my BookTube channel? I've answered this one before in my kind of not the BookTube newbie tag, which I'll link in the cards above. If you haven't seen it, you can find out a bit more information there. But ultimately, I started, I guess, for the same reason that many people started their BookTube accounts. I wanted to talk about the books that I love. For me specifically, I found at the time I couldn't really find any British booktubers who had a real focus on fantasy, which is basically what my channel is. So because there was kind of a void there in terms of what I'd been able to find at least, I thought if I can't find a booktuber talking about the books I like, why don't I become that booktuber? I took some prompting from a couple of really great booktubers, most notably Megan from Megan's Reading Revelations and also Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads, and there's plenty of other people who have helped and supported me along the way, especially in the early stages. But that's basically the gist of it. I took the leap and then haven't stopped running since. Question 5 is, what is my favourite book or author that I found through BookTube or because of BookTube? The 3 that I'm going to pick out I'm pretty sure are because of BookTube recommendations. First one is the Greatcoat series by Sebastian de Castell, which I read all 4 books of this year in the past couple of months, and I really liked them. They are definitely within my top 10 of all time, so really enjoyed those. If you haven't read them, go check them out. I really recommend them. Second one is another one that comes highly recommended, but I've only read book 1 of this trilogy so far, and that is the Lacanius trilogy by James Islington. I read Shadow of What Was Lost, and I'll link in the cards above my review of this title. But again, really enjoyed this one, and I'm going to be reading, hopefully next month, book 2 in this series. And then the third one is a bit of a BookTube darling, especially in the SFF community, but it's a self-published book, which is always great as well, and that is The Sword of Kaigan by M.L. Wang. I had some issues with this book. Again, I'll link my review of the title up in the cards above, but overall I really liked this, and it was a really quality read, especially for a self-published book. There's absolutely no restriction on quality with self-published authors. There's still a bit of a stigma, I think, around them where people think that authors are self-published because they're not good enough to be traditionally published, and that is absolutely 100% false. Yes, you will get that with some authors, but I would say that they're the minority. They're the books that you don't really hear about because they can't gain any traction because of those reasons. They need far too much polishing. Books like The Sword of Kaigan, they definitely could be traditionally published. They are good enough to be traditionally published, but there's a whole host of factors that go into the decision-making process for the authors, and a lot of the time it is literally a case of it works best for the author to self-publish than it does to try and get traditionally published. And just on that point, actually, there is a 4th that I will throw into this answer, and that is the Threadlight trilogy. It's currently just 2 books, but the Threadlight trilogy by Zach Argyle, which is another self-published work. I'm currently reading book 2 at the moment, and again, highly recommend these. They are very good, and it serves as another example where these books are definitely good enough to be traditionally published, but the author has decided to go down the self-published route for reasons of his own. Question 6 is, what kind of books do I read? And if you're familiar with the channel, or if you've seen that original kind of BookTube newbie tag, you'll know the answer to this one. But my reading taste is almost exclusively fantasy. For over 25 years, I've read pretty much just fantasy. It's only in the last couple of years that I've branched out and started to read a bit of sci-fi. Nothing against any other genre, but I'm not interested in reading books from them. I know what I love, and I'm not interested in reading classics or contemporary fiction, horror, thrillers, anything along those lines. They could be absolutely great books, but it's just not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in fantasy and also a little bit in sci-fi. Question 7 is, what is important to me in a book? And I know a lot of people look for specific things with regards to the author, and to be honest, again, that's not something that interests me. So I don't care whether the author is male or female, black, white, or any other colour. I don't care whether it's self-published or traditionally published. The only thing that really matters to me is the story. If a story interests me, I'll look at picking it up. And that is basically the one thing that I look for. There's a whole host of things that will then come into that as to whether the story interests me in terms of the plot, the characters, the world, and so forth. I won't get into it in too much detail. It's just that the overall enjoyment for me as an individual is the #1 priority when I'm looking for a new book. Question 8 is quite a simple one. Do you have a Bookstagram account? And the answer to that one for me is yes. All of my social media channels, I never actually mention this, but all of my social media channels are always in the description box below. So if you do want to have a look at the Instagram account or the Twitter account, you can find a link to them down below the video, and you can go take a look, subscribe, follow, whatever, if you wish to. Question 9 is, besides reading, what is another one of my main hobbies? I answered this one in I think it was the 20 questions tag. If there's enough cards left, I'll link it up above. If not, I'll put it in the description box down below. But with that one, I said that outside of COVID times at least, I play snooker on a regular basis with my best friend. We have kind of a mini tournament between the two of us over the course of the year. I also like to cook, but I wouldn't really call it a hobby because I'm doing that because I need to eat. But I do enjoy cooking. I do enjoy finding new meals to cook, new recipes and so forth. And obviously tasting that, hopefully, great food at the end of it. And then question 10, the last question here is, what is an interesting fact about me? And I always struggle with this one because it's kind of, well, in whose opinion is this going to be interesting? But I'm the only one here, I'm just talking to the camera, so I guess it's my opinion that counts. What I've gone with though for this is, back in my younger days, we're talking literally 20 years ago, I spent a year doing long distance cycling. I joined a UK group where there were organised rides across the year, and these were of varying different lengths, and it wasn't a competition. There was no prizes or anything like that for winning, because it wasn't about winning. It was a case of pushing yourself and can you get around this course from A to B within a set time limit. And we're talking anything really from 100 kilometres upwards. So the longest of these rides that I did, I think it's every 4 years it happens, and it just happened to be in the year that I was doing these rides. But I did from London to Edinburgh and back, which works out, it was a little bit over 1,400 kilometres, which I think is about 930 miles. And I completed that over the course of 5 days, which is well within the time frame. So I got some nice little souvenirs for completing that, little badge and so forth. But it was really great just to be able to push myself and to find out really whether I could actually do this. And yeah, the answer was yes, I could. Over the course of the kind of season as well, each of these rides that you completed, you would get points for depending on how long they were. And they used to have end of season awards where the person who racked up the most points, i.e. completed the most qualifying rides, would get a trophy, and then the person from the opposite sex would get a trophy as well. So normally you'd have a male winning, and then the highest placed female would also get a trophy. In this particular year, there was a girl who won the junior category, and I was the highest placed male, so I got the opposite sex award for juniors. And at the time, that was a record for the highest number of points, the most distance covered, I guess. And actually, that record 20 years later still stands. So I guess technically you could say that I'm a UK junior cycling record holder, which I think is quite interesting. So that's the end of the questions anyway, and what I'll do now is carry on with kind of a mini tutorial on how I create some of my thumbnails. So if you're not interested in watching that, you can leave now and I'll see you in the next video. If you're interested though, carry on watching, and that's coming up next. Okay, so for this mini tutorial, I'm going to give a bit of a whistle-stop guide to how I create some of my video thumbnails in Photoshop. Now, I am not by any means a Photoshop expert. Everything I know about Photoshop I've taught myself through trial and error or through Google and YouTube. Now at this point I'm just going to also say that this is not going to be an in-depth Photoshop tutorial. That's not what you're here for, it's not what I'm here for. If you are here for that, you've got to the wrong video. There's plenty of videos out there that will show you more in depth the ins and outs of Photoshop. This is just going to be a quick little look at some of the things that I do in creating these thumbnails. Okay, so the first thing that I need to decide is what type of thumbnail I'm going to go for. If it's a review video, for instance, for a particular book, I will generally try to take a character from the book and superimpose my head onto the character's body, as with the thumbnail for my Assassin's Apprentice review. Similarly, with the Golden Girls tag, I took a James Bond film poster and superimposed my head over James Bond's body and just played around a little bit with the effects to make it blend in a little bit more closely with the source image. Or alternatively, if I've not really got the opportunity to kind of follow that path, I'll just take a photo of myself holding the book up and then have the background as a part of the book cover. And likewise, if I've read the book on the Kindle, I will just hold up my Kindle. But with these ones, I will digitally add the book cover to the Kindle so it doesn't get obscured by glare, which you can see a little bit more on the thumbnail for Among Thieves, where the rest of the Kindle has got a lot of glare on it, but the cover of the book itself has not. Okay, so the first thing that I do, literally starting from scratch, is I will create a new image. I don't use a template, so a new image of the standard size, which is 1280 pixels wide by 720 pixels tall. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'm literally just going to create the thumbnail for this video that you're watching. I've got a few images saved already to cut down a little bit of the time. But basically the approach that I'm going to take is as if this was a book review, where I'm going to take characters from the book cover and superimpose my face onto one of the bodies. The book that I'm going for is one of Michael J. Sullivan's works. I think it's The Crown Tower, but I can't actually remember, and the cover is in Polish, I believe, so that's no help for me. Also prepared in advance, I've got an image of myself. I literally had to renew my passport a few days ago, so I've just used the same photo that I used for my passport. And I've sourced a background image for the thumbnail as well. So the first thing I'll do is process the images to give them a nice transparent background to make them easier to work with for my purposes. For this I use an online background removal tool which is called fococlipping.com, F-O-C-O clipping. I've used several of these sites in the past, but this is the best one I've found for the purpose I want it for. So I'll remove the background from the source image of Royce and Hadrian from the book cover, and also from my passport photo of myself, and then put both of these into Photoshop. It's at this point in the video that I realised I got my dimensions wrong. It should be 1280 by 720. I was on autopilot when creating this. But once I've got the blank image of the correct dimensions open, I'll then literally just drag and drop the source image of the book cover into place. Next step is to remove the head of Hadrian so that I can put mine in its place. So for this I'll zoom in nice and close to get a bit more control over it and draw around outlining his neck where that layer of clothing will just give a nice little cut off point. Once that's done, I will normally, instead of delete, I will just layer via copy, so that I've always got the original if I need to do any size comparisons or so forth, but I'll then just view this back in normal size, and by hiding the layer that I've just created of the head, I'm now left with a headless body. So now it's my turn, and what I'll do is I'll crop the image so I'm only taking across what I need, and it helps me to get the size comparison a lot more accurate, so I know roughly what size Hadrian's head was. These two images both start off at completely different sizes, but by resizing my head to just a bit bigger than what I need, I'll be able to then add it into the image and not have to spend too long scaling it down to the right size. But once I've scaled it and I've moved it around a little bit until I'm happy with the placement of it, we're good to go. And the important thing to note here as well is that when I place my face into this image, I moved the layer below the original layer of Hadrian's body, so it just makes it nice and easy to line it up, and I don't need to fiddle around too much with trying to remove extra bits of clothing or extra bits of my neck or shoulders and so forth, because the image above it, the layer above it, covers most of that up anyway. So the next thing I'm going to do is just some background work in, just neatening it up, making the colour match a little bit better. I'm really not very good at this, so I'll just go through a few techniques that I've picked up and just play around with it to see what works best. With this one, all I'm going to do is play around a little bit with the hue and the saturation and a couple of different layer types, just to try and make the skin tone match up a little bit more. But actually it's not too important, because most of the times that you're going to see this thumbnail, it's going to be at a smaller size where things like that matter a lot less. So it's great unless you're a perfectionist like I am, where I'll still try to make it look as good as possible within the limits of my talent. Okay, so when I'm happy with what I've got, I'll then take the background image and move it into the bottom layer of this, so I've got the characters above this background that I have. Normally what I'll do here as well is just create a white layer above the background image and just play around with the opacity just to tone it down a little bit and just make it so the background isn't quite as bold and is maybe a bit more muted, a bit faded against the characters that are supposed to be the focal point of the actual image. With this one, I'm also going to play around a little bit with that white colour on the overlay, just to make the whole image stand out a little bit more, instead of just having a kind of a plain dull grey background. So I've just added a tiny hint of blue into it, which just makes it look a little bit better for my eye. Next up, we're going to add some text. And because Photoshop just remembers the previous text that was used, this has come through absolutely massive. So I normally go for around about 150 to 180 for the font size, and the font that I tend to use just for a bit of standardization across all of my thumbnails is called Blackside. So I'll just play around with the text a little bit just to get something that I like. I'm not too bothered about making everything symmetrical or anything like that, but what I'll normally do is just position them a little bit so that it just fits the screen or fits the space that I've got available, and so that everything's legible. I'll normally take the start words like the and maybe tag and just make them a little bit smaller because they're not the important words. And I'll also split them up a little bit. I find it easier to do this just by typing everything out, rasterizing the text so that I can then cut it and then just moving the individual words around to where I require them to be. Then for this thumbnail, I'm just going to add the little additional snippet of text below in exactly the same fashion, split it up, and then move them to individual lines so that they're where I want them to be. The last thing I'm going to do with the text once I'm happy with it is just put a stroke around it. So that's literally just the dark outline around the text itself. I normally just do a 3-point black stroke around white text, just so it stands out and can be read against any background or image that you're going to place it over. And then with that done, I'm pretty much finished with this particular thumbnail. I'm not really going to do anything more with it because it suits the purposes that I want for it, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out for something that I've just quickly knocked together. So that's basically how I create one of these thumbnails. As I've said, I am by no means a Photoshop expert, and also this is not a full Photoshop tutorial, so it's not showing you how to do all of those individual elements and what to press and so forth. But if you do have any specific questions on the techniques that I use, I'm normally quite happy to answer them. That's it for today's video anyway, so if you've made it this far, give the video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and if you want to see more content from me. I'll catch you in another video soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now. So question 1 is, what kind of camera do I use? And Milo, for fuck's sake. No, it's not a toy. Pissing Nora.